I would now like to give you a brief outline of the ancestry of my family on my mother's side. My mother's maiden name was Amanda Pellerin, and her mother, my grandmother, was Amelia Pellerin, and her maiden name was Lapin. And I can remember my great-grandmother, Lapin, who was residing in her later years with Grandma, and this great old lady died at the age of 97. And there's a lot of folklore and a lot of stories in those days, and being such a youngster at the time, I can't recall it all very accurately, but a general history of the family on my mother's side is that they immigrated from the Quebec area. The family men were blacksmiths by trade, and the blacksmith business and the slaughterhouse business were going hand in hand. Both the great-grandfather and the grandfather followed the trade of blacksmithing and doing slaughterhouse work. They maintained their own facilities for slaughtering beef cattle on their premises. Grandma Pellerin often told me that how they immigrated from Quebec. They had started off in the spring of the year by boat, and they followed through the Great Lakes water system and arrived in the village of Lyons in Michigan in the Upper Peninsula. Lyons being located on Keweenaw Bay, and that was the terminus point of travel. The Indian missionaries were located there, a Catholic institution. They maintained headquarters and took care of the Indians. Grandma and her parents, Grandma at this time now was only age 3, and they were looking for a suitable location to set up their blacksmithing business, trying to find a locality with promise of development and expansion. So before the winter freeze set in, it was a family decision was made that Grandma Pellerin, being only 3 years of age, she was left at the Indian orphanage at Assassins, which is only 3 miles out from Berga and Lyons. They maintained an Indian orphanage there for the young Indian children, and arrangements were made for my grandmother to reside there over the winter months. And her parents and grandparents then loaded all of their household equipment and blacksmithing work, tools and such, onto a scow, and a tug moved them about 40 miles by water up into the Portage Lake waterway, and they arrived on the shores of Lake Linden in the early fall in the 1800s. I can't give you the exact date. And the men of the family made arrangements to buy a piece of property in what they thought would be an ideal business location. It was located 1 block up from the lakeshore, and they were going to set up business there the following spring. During the course of the winter, while they were residing at the local hotel, the men folks got together with other business people and townsmen, and they were influenced to trade off their piece of property that they had purchased a block up from the lakeshore in exchange for a piece of property located directly on the shoreline, thinking that that would be the busy spot of commerce in the village. And it proved wrong, because the original site that they had purchased proved to be the town center, and their exact piece of ground now has the city hall and the municipal buildings on it. So they had let go of a valuable piece of property, and for that they were located down along the lake shore in low ground, and they always had trouble there with drainage and everything. But the following year, after they had been established and a home had been built for them, they went back down to Leonce and Berga and the orphanage at Assamans, and they obtained their daughter, Parmelia. My grandmother's name was Parmelia and shortened to Amelia. And now she is 4.5 years of age, and they returned again by the water route to their homestead. There being no overland travel except probably by a horse, saddle horse or something of that nature. There were no roads and no railroads in there at that time. And so Grandma now can recall at a very early age how her parents struggled. They built a blacksmith shop. They built a slaughterhouse. The townspeople and farmers would bring their beef cattle in there, and they were slaughtered. There being no refrigeration, they had a community of people that if you killed your beef cow, you made a distribution of the meat so that everybody would have some of it before spoilage occurred. And they in turn then would, somebody would kill their beef cattle, and then the distribution of the meat would be made the following week or whatever. And the town began to flourish. The mining company began to develop in the area, and my grandmother, Parmelia, her maiden name being Lapin now at this time, she had her eye on a young Canadian who had come into the area, his name being Parent. And she married this man and bore 4 children. One died at a very early age, shortly after birth, and the other 3 children were my mother, the oldest, Amanda, and then Walter, and the youngest was Raymond. And now I'm bringing you up to the period of time of World War I. Grandma Parent's husband, being a Canadian citizen, returned to Canada at the outbreak of World War I and joined the Canadian Armed Forces. And when the war was over, he never did come back to his family. They knew that he had not been killed in service by some sort of a grapevine system. They found out that he had even entered back into Michigan and had resumed his work as a woodsman. But Grandma really had a struggle in raising her 3 young children, and she accomplished this by being a midwife to the people in the mothers in the village of Lake Linden, and she also took up wallpapering type of work. And of course, needless to say, the 2 boys had a rough time of it, and they earned whatever money they could in the town, and it was one big struggle. Now, I told you that my great grandmother, her family name, her married name being Lapin, she had died at age 97, and my grandmother, Amelia Parent, died in her late 80s, and she died for employment, was working at the U.S. Rubber Company as a pipe fitter. and he married a Canadian girl, Margaret, and Margaret Flynn. And by that marriage, they had 2 children. That would be Paul Parent and Patricia Parent. In the 1930s, Walter Parent found out that his dad had died in the town of Newberry, Michigan, at the poorhouse, and that he was buried there in a local cemetery. So that accounts for my grandfather, Parent, and Grandma Parent and Walter are buried in the Lake Linden Cemetery along with a cousin of theirs named Peril. We have a family plot, Pellerin plot, with my mother and dad and my sister Arlene and husband Wallace, and then there's another family plot of my grandparents Pellerins. There's Grandma Parent, or Grandma Pellerin. There's Grandma Pellerin and Grandpa Pellerin, and they have a daughter, Mary, and a son, Louis, buried in their family plot. And then if you were to go up into the new section of the cemetery, you'd find another Pellerin plot up there for Gerald Pellerin, a veteran of the Vietnam War, and he is the most recent burial in that cemetery. Here in the Detroit area, if you visit Mount Olivet Cemetery, you'll find the grave of my uncle Raymond Parent and my brother Alfred Pellerin.